The rain hammered against the cafe window as Evan Brooks sat across from a woman who wasn't meant for him. Claire Morgan's eyes, sharp, assessing, beautiful, studied him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. She was supposed to be meeting his brother, the successful one, the charming one. Instead, she got the baker who smelled like vanilla and regret, sitting in a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit. When she leaned forward and said, "You're not who I expected, but maybe that's exactly what I needed," Evan felt the careful walls of his quiet life begin to crack. What started as a favor was about to become the mistake that changed everything. Before we dive into Evan's story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin where everything changed. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the darkness at 4:30 in the morning, the same as it had every single day for the past 3 years. Evan Brooks' hand shot out from under the covers, silencing it with practiced precision before the second ring could fully form. He lay there for a moment in the pre-dawn stillness of his studio apartment, staring at the ceiling he couldn't quite see, listening to the familiar creaks and settles of the old building that housed both his livelihood and his life. This was his favorite time of day, the pocket of quiet before the world woke up and made demands. Before customers needed their morning pastries, and his mother needed reassurance that he was eating properly, and his brother needed someone to compare himself against and always come out ahead. In these dark, silent moments, Evan existed in a space entirely his own. He swung his legs out of bed, feet finding the cold hardwood floor, and began the routine that had become as natural as breathing. Shower. Dress in the same style of clothes he wore every day. Jeans, a plain t-shirt, the flannel his father had given him years ago, back when he'd still been alive to give things. Downstairs before 5, flipping switches, firing up the massive commercial oven that was the heart of Brooks Bakery, a name that carried more hope than accuracy since Evan was the only Brooks who actually worked there. The bakery occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building on the eastern edge of Portland, tucked between a vintage record shop that opened sporadically and a laundromat that hummed at all hours. It wasn't the trendy part of town. No artisanal coffee shops or boutique yoga studios here. Just working people who needed bread and didn't want to pay boutique prices for it. Evan's hands moved through the familiar choreography of morning prep, weighing flour, proofing yeast, the rhythmic fold and press of kneading dough. There was something deeply satisfying about the transformation that happened under his hands. The way disparate ingredients became something whole and warm and necessary. Bread didn't judge you. It didn't ask why you were 25 and alone, why you'd chosen a life of 4 a.m. wake-ups and flour-dusted solitude instead of the path everyone expected. His phone buzzed on the steel prep table, an unwelcome intrusion into his meditative silence. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. With a sigh that sent a small puff of flour into the air, Evan wiped his hands on his apron and checked the screen. 7 missed calls, all from his mother. The dread that settled in his stomach was as familiar as the sourdough starter he'd been maintaining for 2 years. He called her back. "Evan, thank goodness." Linda Brooks' voice carried that particular pitch of maternal distress that preceded inconvenient requests. "I've been calling for an hour." "It's 5:15 in the morning, Mom. I've been working." "I know, sweetheart, I know, but this is important. It's about Michael." Evan's jaw tightened at the mention of his older brother. Of course it was about Michael. Everything always was. "What about him?" "He's sick. That terrible flu that's been going around. He's been in bed for 2 days, completely miserable, and you know he has that dinner tonight." "Mom, with that lovely woman from the dating app, Claire something. They've been talking for weeks, and this is their first actual meeting, and he's devastated that he has to cancel. So he should cancel." Evan pinched the bridge of his nose, already knowing where this was heading. "Well, that's the thing. I had an idea." The forced brightness in her voice made him wince. "What if you went instead?" The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hiss of steam from the proof box. "You want me to go on Michael's date?" "It's not a date exactly, more of a first meeting, very casual, and you boys look so similar, and Michael's already told her so much about the family business. The family business that I actually run while Michael pushes paper at that tech firm." Linda's sigh was long-suffering. Evan, please. I'm not asking you to marry the woman. Just meet her, explain the situation, apologize on Michael's behalf. She seems like a very understanding person. Michael's really excited about this one. Then Michael can meet her when he's feeling better. You know how these things work. If he cancels now, especially at the last minute, she'll think he's not interested. First impressions matter, sweetheart. You could save this for your brother. Just this once. Couldn't you step up for family? The guilt hook sank deep, as it always did. Step up for family, as if he hadn't been the one stepping up since their father died, keeping the bakery alive when everyone else had wanted to sell it, maintaining the one piece of their father that still existed in the world, while Michael built his impressive career and their mother bragged about her son, the senior analyst. Where and when? Evan heard himself say, hating the resignation in his own voice. Oh, thank you, honey. You're a lifesaver. It's at that cafe on the waterfront, Azure. At 7 tonight. She'll be wearing a blue scarf. Michael showed me her picture. She's very pretty, professional looking. Great, Evan said flatly. Anything else? Just be yourself. Well, maybe mention the tech stuff Michael does. And could you maybe not mention that you're a baker? It's just, you know how some women are about ambition. Goodbye, Mom. He ended the call before she could protest, set the phone face down on the table, and returned to his dough with more force than necessary. The rhythmic pounding helped burn off some of the frustration, but not enough. Never enough. Be yourself, but not really. Show up, but for someone else. Step up, but stay invisible. The story of his entire goddamn life. The day passed in its usual blur of transactions and small talk. Mrs. Chen bought her daily sourdough and told him about her grandson's baseball game. The construction crew from the site 3 blocks down came in for their standing order of bear claws and coffee. A young couple debated between the chocolate croissants and the almond ones, finally buying both, feeding each other bites while they waited for the bus outside. Evan watched them through the window while he wiped down the display case, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. He'd had that once, or something close to it. Sarah, during his brief stint at culinary school before his father got sick, and he'd come home to take over the bakery. She'd talked about opening a restaurant together, about the life they'd build. Then she'd met a classmate whose family owned a vineyard in Napa, and suddenly Evan's small-town bakery dreams looked a lot less appealing than wine country and inherited wealth. That had been 4 years ago. He hadn't tried since, hadn't seen the point. The clock crawled toward closing time. At 5, Evan locked the front door, ran the register, and counted out the day's modest take. Enough to cover expenses and keep the lights on. Never enough to expand or renovate or become the kind of business that might make his mother proud. Upstairs, his apartment felt more cramped than usual as he stood in front of his closet, trying to figure out what one wore to a fake date on behalf of one's brother. Everything he owned was practical. Flannels, jeans, a few plain button-downs for the rare occasions he left the neighborhood. Nothing that screamed successful tech professional who's worth a beautiful woman's time. He settled on dark jeans and a gray button-down, the closest thing he had to dressy. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man who looked exactly like what he was. Tired, underpaid, covered in a faint dusting of flour he could never quite wash entirely away. He and Michael shared the same basic features, the same dark hair and hazel eyes, the same square jaw inherited from their father. But Michael had polish, confidence, the ease of someone who'd never had to choose between his dreams and his obligations. The drive to the waterfront took 20 minutes through rain-slicked streets, Portland showing off its legendary gloom in full force. Evan found parking 3 blocks from Azure, a trendy cafe that was exactly the kind of place he'd never choose for himself. All exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a menu that probably charged $12 for toast. He was 15 minutes early. Sitting in his truck, watching the rain stream down the windshield, he considered just leaving, texting Michael that he'd tried and the woman hadn't shown up. Who would know? But guilt and ingrained duty pushed him out into the rain, collar turned up against the wind coming off the river. Azure was warm and loud when he pushed through the door, full of the after-work crowd seeking refuge from the weather. The air smelled like expensive coffee and vanilla, and every table seemed occupied by people who belonged in spaces like this, sleek, confident, discussing things that mattered. Evan scanned the room, looking for a blue scarf, and found her immediately. She sat at a corner table by the window, her profile illuminated by the soft glow of the table lamp. The blue scarf was draped artfully over the back of her chair, and she was scrolling through her phone with one hand while the other absently turned a coffee cup in slow circles. Even from across the room, Evan could see that his mother's description of very pretty was a dramatic understatement. Claire Morgan, he assumed that was her, unless the universe was cruel enough to have multiple beautiful women in blue scarves here tonight, had the kind of presence that made people look twice. Not because she was trying, but because something about her commanded attention. Dark hair pulled back in a way that looked casual, but probably wasn't. Sharp cheekbones. An expression of focused intelligence even while doing something as mundane as checking her phone. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, professional but not stuffy, and when she glanced up at the sound of the door, her eyes were a startling clear gray. Those eyes found him, held for a moment with polite curiosity, then returned to her phone. She was checking the time, he realized, probably wondering if Michael was going to be late. Evan's feet had stopped moving. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, walk out, tell Michael to clean up his own mess. This woman was so clearly out of his league that the whole situation felt like a cosmic joke. What was he supposed to say? "Hi, I'm the consolation prize brother here to make excuses for the one you actually want to meet." But before he could act on the impulse to flee, she looked up again, and this time her eyes locked onto his with recognition. She smiled, small, polite, the kind of smile people gave to strangers they were about to meet, and raised her hand in a little wave. Too late to run now. Evan forced his feet to move, weaving between tables until he stood in front of her, acutely aware of every eye in the cafe, every person who could see how badly he didn't fit here. "Michael?" She stood, extending her hand, and up close she was even more striking. Taller than he expected, maybe 5'8", with a directness in her gaze that made him feel simultaneously seen and transparent. "Actually, I'm Evan, Michael's brother." He shook her hand, noting the firm grip, the slight callus on her index finger that suggested she spent a lot of time with a pen. "Michael's sick, really sick. He asked me to come apologize in person and explain." Something shifted in her expression, too quick for him to read. He sent his brother to cancel on him? "I know how it sounds. I told my mom it was a terrible idea, but she can be—" He trailed off, realizing he was making it worse. "Look, I'm sorry. This is weird and awkward, and you probably have better things to do with your evening. I'll just sit down." "What?" Claire gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. You came all the way here in the rain. The least I can do is hear the full explanation. And maybe you could help me finish this coffee. I ordered a large like an idiot, and I'm already shaky from the caffeine." Evan sat, more out of surprise than intention. This close, he could smell her perfume. Something subtle and expensive. Nothing like the vanilla extract and yeast that probably clung to him no matter how much he showered. "So," Claire settled back into her chair, studying him with that direct gaze, "you're the brother. Michael mentioned you in passing, but I got the impression you two weren't particularly close." "That's one way to put it." "What would be another way?" The question caught him off guard. People didn't usually ask Evan direct questions about himself. He was the background character in other people's stories, the reliable one who showed up and did what was needed and then faded back into the scenery. "We're close in the way brothers are when they've run out of things to say to each other," Evan said finally. "We grew up together. We share DNA. We show up for holidays. Beyond that," he shrugged. Claire's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's refreshingly honest. Most people would give me some line about how they're best friends. Michael and I are a lot of things. Best friends isn't one of them." "What are you then?" "I'm the brother who runs the family bakery that our dad left behind. Michael's the one who got out, built a career, made our mother proud. I'm the fallback plan, the safety net, the guy you call when you need someone to cover your blind date because you're too sick to charm someone yourself." The words came out harder than he intended, carrying an edge of bitterness he usually kept locked down. But something about this woman, this situation, this whole ridiculous night had cracked open a valve he didn't know was there. Claire didn't look shocked or uncomfortable. If anything, she seemed more interested. "A bakery, that's what you do?" "That's what I do. Brooks Bakery, on the east side. We make bread, pastries. The occasional wedding cake if someone's desperate and not too picky about fondant work." He waited for the polite dismissal, The subtle shift in body language that said she'd already written him off as unambitious, uninteresting, unworthy of further attention. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. Do you like it? What? The bakery. Do you like doing it, or is it just the obligation? Nobody had ever asked him that. Not his mother, who saw it as a burden he'd nobly shouldered. Not Michael, who treated it as evidence of Evan's lack of ambition. Not even Sarah, who'd seen it as a temporary stop on the way to something better. Both, Evan admitted. I like the work. There's something satisfying about making things with your hands, about the fact that people need what you make every single day. Bread is fundamental, you know. It's been sustaining people for thousands of years. But do I like that it chose me instead of me choosing it? That's more complicated. Most honest things are. Claire took a sip of her coffee, grimaced slightly at the temperature. For what it's worth, I think Michael might have done us both a favor by getting sick. How do you figure? Because in the 3 minutes I've been talking to you, you've told me more real things than most people I meet tell me in 3 months, and I'm including the people I work with every day. She paused, tilting her head slightly. You want to know something funny? Sure. I almost canceled tonight, 3 times. Stood in my apartment, finger hovering over the text message, trying to convince myself I had better things to do than meet another stranger who'd probably spend the whole night talking about himself. And yet here you are. And yet here I am. Her smile was self-deprecating. I'm apparently a glutton for punishment, or maybe just hopeful enough to be stupid. That doesn't sound like you. You've known me for 5 minutes. How would you know what sounds like me? Evan met her eyes. Because you strike me as someone who doesn't do anything without a good reason, including sitting here with the wrong brother instead of cutting your losses and going home. The cafe noise seemed to dim around them. Claire's expression shifted into something Evan couldn't quite name, surprise maybe, or recognition of something unexpected. You want to know the real reason I didn't cancel? She asked quietly. Yeah. Because I'm tired. I'm 28 years old. I have a career I worked my ass off for. I live in a nice apartment. I have good friends. And from the outside, my life probably looks exactly the way it's supposed to. But I'm so tired of performing all the time, of being the version of myself that fits into the right boxes. And tonight I thought maybe, just maybe, I could meet someone who'd let me stop performing for a few hours. Evan's throat felt tight. And instead you got me, the guy who can't even perform well enough to pretend to be his brother. No. Claire's voice was firm. I got someone who showed up in the rain to do an awkward favor for family he doesn't even particularly like. Someone who answered my questions honestly, instead of trying to impress me. Someone who isn't trying to sell me a version of themselves that doesn't exist. She paused. That's actually pretty rare in my experience. Your experience with what? Blind dates? With people in general. The waitress appeared, breaking the moment. She looked between them expectantly, and Evan realized they'd been talking for 20 minutes without ordering anything beyond Claire's initial coffee. Are you hungry? Claire asked. I didn't come here expecting to stay for dinner. That's not what I asked. Evan felt a smile tug at his lips despite himself. Yeah, I'm hungry. Good, me too. Claire handed her menu to the waitress without opening it. I'll have the mushroom risotto and a glass of the Pinot Noir, and he'll have... She looked at Evan expectantly. The burger, medium, and whatever beer you have on tap that's not an IPA. When the waitress left, Claire raised an eyebrow. Not an IPA fan. I'm convinced the whole IPA thing is a mass delusion, like the Emperor's New Clothes, but for beer. Everyone pretends to like them because they think they're supposed to, but they all taste like pine sol and regret. Claire laughed. A real laugh, bright and unexpected, that made several people at nearby tables glance over. That's the best description of IPAs I've ever heard. I'm stealing that. Be my guest. So what do you drink when you're not being dragged to blind dates you didn't sign up for? Mostly coffee. Whiskey sometimes, if it's been a particularly long day. Water when I'm trying to be responsible, which is most of the time because running a bakery at 4:30 in the morning is incompatible with hangovers. 4:30, Claire repeated. Every day? 6 days a week. Sundays the shop's closed, but I still wake up at 4:30 anyway. Body clock doesn't care about days off. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's also peaceful. The city's quiet at that hour, Just me and the dough and the oven. No one wanting anything from me except the bread to rise on schedule. He stopped, suddenly self-conscious. Sorry, I'm talking too much. You're really not. Claire's expression was intent. I want to hear this. What's it like, the early morning thing? So Evan told her about the meditation of kneading, the satisfaction of a perfect crust, the regular customers who'd been coming in since his father's time, about Mrs. Chen and her stories, about the construction crew that always left exact change in the tip jar, about the quiet pride of making something people needed every single day. And Claire listened like she actually cared, asking questions that showed she was paying attention. What was the hardest thing about running a bakery? The isolation, the financial pressure, the constant awareness that one bad month could destroy everything his father built. What was the best thing? The moment when someone tasted something he made and their whole face lit up with genuine pleasure. Did he ever want to do something else? Sometimes, late at night, when the accounts didn't balance and his back ached and he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something just for himself. But mostly no, because the bakery was the last piece of his father that still existed in the world, and letting it die would feel like losing him all over again. Their food arrived. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing with an ease that felt almost dangerous in its comfort. Claire told him about her job as a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized firm, about the satisfaction of finding patterns in numbers, about the frustration of working with people who thought creative accounting was a compliment instead of a crime. I'm the person who finds the problems everyone else wants to ignore, she said, spearing a mushroom with her fork, which makes me approximately as popular as you'd expect. So you're good at your job. I'm very good at my job, which is why they pay me well and mostly leave me alone to do it. She paused. But it's not exactly making the world a better place, is it? I help rich people's money make more money. Sometimes I find the ones who are cheating the system. Mostly, I just maintain the system that was already broken. You sound like you've thought about that a lot. I have, especially lately. Claire set down her fork, her expression distant. My boss keeps talking about me making partner. It's supposed to be this huge goal, this validation of everything I've worked for. But all I can think about is how making partner means more of the same. Longer hours, higher stakes, bigger numbers that ultimately don't matter to anyone's actual life. So don't do it. Just like that? Just like that. You clearly don't want it. Why are you pretending you do? Claire's laugh was sharp. Because that's what you do when you're a woman in finance. You don't turn down opportunities. You don't admit you might want something different. You definitely don't confess to a stranger that you're questioning the entire trajectory of your life. I'm not a stranger, Evan said quietly. Not anymore. The words hung between them, carrying more weight than he'd intended. Claire's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because her shoulders relaxed slightly. No, she agreed. I suppose you're not. They talked through dessert, a chocolate torte Claire insisted they split, even though Evan protested that after tasting it, he'd only be disappointed by his own baking. They talked through coffee, through the gradual emptying of the cafe around them, through the waitress's pointed clearing of nearby tables. It was Claire's phone that finally interrupted them, buzzing insistently with a call. She glanced at the screen and made a face. My friend Jessica. She made me promise to call her if the date was going badly, and I needed an exit strategy. Claire answered with a smile in her voice. Hey Jess, no, I'm fine. Actually, I'm really good. I'll tell you later. Yeah, I promise. She hung up and looked at Evan. She was prepared to fake an emergency if I texted her the code word. What's the code word? The fish is not fresh. Claire's grin was infectious. We came up with it after a truly disastrous date where the guy spent 90 minutes telling me about his cryptocurrency investments and his theory that the moon landing was faked to hide the existence of aliens. Was the fish fresh that time? The fish was extremely not fresh. I texted her from the bathroom. She called pretending to be my landlord with a burst pipe emergency, and I got out of there before he could suggest splitting dessert. I'm glad this one's going better. Me too. Claire's expression turned serious. Evan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. His stomach tightened. Okay. Why did you really come tonight? And don't give me the line about doing your mother a favor. Evan considered lying, or deflecting, or giving her the easy answer she probably expected. But something about the way she looked at him, direct and unafraid, made him want to match her honesty. Because I'm 25 years old and I can't remember the last time I did something that wasn't an obligation. The bakery's an obligation. Taking care of my mother's feelings is an obligation. Being the responsible son is an obligation. And I'm so used to it that when my mom called this morning, I didn't even consider saying no. I just automatically said yes because that's what I do. I say yes to things I don't want, for people who don't appreciate it, because somewhere along the line I convinced myself that being useful was the same as being valued. Claire didn't look away, didn't offer empty reassurance. And now? Now I'm sitting here with a woman who was supposed to meet my brother, and I'm wondering what would have happened if I'd said no. If Michael had come here instead. If you'd met him like you were supposed to. Do you want to know what I think would have happened? Yeah. I think we would have had a perfectly pleasant dinner. He would have been charming and interesting, and I would have laughed at the right times and asked the appropriate questions. And at the end of the night, we probably would have made plans for a second date, which would have been equally pleasant. And eventually, we might have even started dating for real, and it would have been fine, just fine. And that's bad? It's not bad. It's just not. She paused, searching for the word. It's not this. This feeling like I'm talking to someone who actually sees me instead of the version of me I usually show people. Like I could say something messy or complicated or uncertain, and you wouldn't immediately try to fix it or dismiss it or turn it into a joke to make yourself more comfortable. Evan's heart was beating too fast. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. Neither do I, but I don't want to stop. The cafe lights flickered, the universal signal for, we'd like to close now. Evan glanced at his phone and was shocked to see it was nearly 11. They'd been talking for almost 4 hours. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. They stood under the cafe's awning, neither quite ready to move toward their cars and the end of whatever this night had been. I should probably text Michael, Evan said. Let him know I delivered his apology. What are you going to tell him? That I met you, that you were understanding about him being sick, that he should follow up when he's feeling better. Claire's expression shifted into something complicated. Is that what you want? For him to follow up? The question felt like standing at a cliff's edge. Behind him was the safe, predictable path. Deliver the message, step back, let Michael and Claire have their chance at whatever pleasant, fine relationship might develop. In front of him was uncertainty, potential disappointment, the risk of wanting something that might not want him back. No, Evan admitted. That's not what I want. Good. Claire's smile was small but certain. Because I was really hoping you'd say that. So what happens now? Now you give me your number, and tomorrow, if you're not too tired from your 4:30 wake-up call, maybe I could stop by your bakery. See what all this bread fuss is about. Evan pulled out his phone with hands that were slightly unsteady. They exchanged numbers, fingers brushing in the transfer, both of them hyper-aware of the touch. Claire, he said, as she started to turn toward her car. This thing that's happening, I'm not good at it. Dating, romance, whatever this is. I work weird hours. I smell like yeast more often than not. And I'm not going to be able to take you to fancy restaurants or impress you with my career trajectory. I don't want fancy restaurants, and I spend enough time around people trying to impress me with their careers. What I want, she stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker gray in her eyes. What I want is someone who shows up honestly. Someone who tells me the truth even when it's not flattering. Someone who might be a little bit lost but is trying anyway. I can do that, Evan said quietly. Then I'll see you tomorrow. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture that somehow carried more intimacy than a kiss might have. Thank you for tonight, for being the wrong brother at exactly the right time. She walked to her car, a sleek sedan that probably cost more than Evan made in a year. But before she got in, she turned back one more time, her smile visible even in the dim glow of the streetlight. Evan? For what it's worth, I don't think there was anything wrong about tonight at all. He watched her drive away, then stood in the misty rain for several minutes more, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Michael. How did it go? Did she understand? Evan stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. He could keep up the fiction, play his role, step back into the shadows where he belonged. Instead, he typed, "She understood. We talked for a while. I'm going to see her again tomorrow." The response came quickly. "Wait, what? You're seeing Claire? Why?" "Because she asked me to. Because I want to. Because for once I'm not going to step aside for something I actually want." "Dude, that's not cool. I told her things about myself. She thinks she knows me." Evan's jaw tightened. "Then you should have showed up yourself. I went there to apologize for you, not to pretend to be you. Mom's not going to like this. Mom will get over it. Or she won't. Either way, I'm done making my life smaller so everyone else's can be easier." He silenced his phone and drove home through rain-washed streets, adrenaline still singing in his veins. The apartment above the bakery had never felt quite like home before, just a place to sleep between shifts, a space he occupied but didn't really inhabit. But tonight, climbing the stairs with Claire's number saved in his phone and the memory of her smile vivid in his mind, it felt different. Like maybe it could become more than just where he slept. Like maybe he could become more than just the reliable son who always said yes. In the dark of his room, Evan set his alarm for 4:30 and lay down, fully expecting anxiety to keep him awake. Instead, he fell asleep almost immediately, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he dreamed of mornings that held more than just rising dough and routine. He dreamed of a woman with gray eyes and honest questions walking into his bakery, choosing him not because he was convenient or available or the safe option, but because something in his messy, complicated truth called to something in hers. And in the dream, he was brave enough to let her stay. The alarm felt different the next morning. Same shrill sound, same dark room, same 4:30 timestamp glowing on the screen. But when Evan's hand shot out to silence it, his first thought wasn't the weight of another identical day. It was Claire's smile in the rain, the way she'd touched his arm before leaving, the promise of tomorrow that had suddenly arrived. He moved through his routine faster than usual, the familiar motions charged with unfamiliar energy. Shower, dress, downstairs by 5. But today his hands trembled slightly as he measured flour, and he caught himself checking his phone every few minutes, even though it was barely dawn and no reasonable person would be awake yet. The dough rose. The ovens heated. The first loaves went in with their usual precision. But Evan's mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, every look, trying to convince himself it had been real and not some rain-soaked fever dream brought on by exhaustion and loneliness. His phone buzzed at 6:15. His heart jumped before logic reminded him it was probably his mother, ready to deliver her opinion on his text exchange with Michael. But the name on the screen made his breath catch. "Claire, is it too early to ask what time you open?" Asking for a friend who definitely isn't me, counting down the minutes until she can get coffee and see if last night was as good as she remembers. Evan stared at the message, a smile spreading across his flour-dusted face before he could stop it. He typed with hands that left dusty fingerprints on the screen. 7 on weekdays. But the coffee's ready at 6:30 if you don't mind the door being locked and the baker being a mess. Her response came within seconds. "The baker being a mess is kind of the whole appeal. See you at 6:30. Evan looked down at himself. Ancient flannel spotted with what might be butter or might be dried dough from yesterday, jeans that had seen better years, hair he hadn't bothered to comb because who cared at this hour. He had approximately 12 minutes to become presentable. He made it in 8, managing a quick change into his least worn flannel and running damp hands through his hair and what he hoped passed for styling. The front displays were only half stocked, the chairs still upside down on the tables, but there was nothing he could do about that now because headlights were pulling up outside and his heart was doing something complicated in his chest. Claire stepped out of her car looking like she'd walked out of a different world than the one Evan inhabited. Tailored black pants, a burgundy blouse, her hair pulled back in that same casually perfect way. But her smile when she saw him through the glass door was warm and slightly nervous, which somehow made her more, rather than less, beautiful. He unlocked the door, suddenly hyper-aware of every shabby detail of the bakery. The worn linoleum, the ancient display case his father had bought second-hand, the faded awning that desperately needed replacing. "Hi," Claire said, stepping inside and bringing with her the scent of that expensive perfume and something else, something like rain and possibility. Hi yourself, you're really here. I'm really here. She glanced around the bakery, and Evan braced himself for polite disappointment. Instead, her expression softened into something like wonder. Evan, this place is perfect. You don't have to lie to make me feel better. I'm not lying, look at this. She moved to the display case where the morning's first croissants were cooling on racks. Everything's made here, isn't it? By you. Not in some factory, not from frozen dough, just you and flour and whatever magic happens at 4 in the morning. It's not magic, it's chemistry and repetition. Chemistry and repetition sounds like magic to me. She turned back to him, eyes bright. Can I watch? Or is that weird? I just really want to see how this works. So Evan made coffee while Claire perched on a stool by the prep table, asking questions that showed she was actually interested rather than just being polite. How long did dough need to proof? What made sourdough different from regular bread? Why did he use a baking stone instead of just the oven rack? He answered while his hands shaped rolls, while he pulled perfectly bronzed loaves from the oven, while he piped filling into Danish pastries. And somewhere in the explaining, the self-consciousness faded. This was what he knew, what he was good at, and Claire's genuine curiosity made it feel less like routine and more like revelation. Try this. He handed her a still warm cinnamon roll, the frosting just starting to melt into the swirls. Claire took a bite, and the sound she made was almost obscene. Her eyes closed, her whole face transformed by pleasure, and Evan felt heat that had nothing to do with the ovens crawl up his neck. Oh my God, she said when she could speak again. Evan, this is incredible. Why aren't you famous? Why isn't there a line around the block? Because I'm on the east side, not in the trendy neighborhoods. Because I don't have money for marketing or social media presence. Because I'm just trying to keep the lights on, not build an empire. But you could, if you wanted to. Could I? The question came out harder than he intended. You think banks are lining up to give loans to small bakeries? You think landlords keep rent reasonable out of the goodness of their hearts? This place survives because I work 70-hour weeks and take home barely enough to live on. That's not a foundation for expansion. That's barely a foundation for existing. Claire set down the cinnamon roll, her expression troubled. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about the reality of it. I just got excited about how good everything is. No, I'm sorry. Evan rubbed his face, leaving a streak of flour he didn't notice. I didn't mean to snap. It's just a sensitive subject. Michael's always on me about reaching my potential and thinking bigger, like the problem is my ambition instead of the structural impossibility of making a living wage doing what I love in a city that's pricing out everyone who isn't in tech. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is brave. Keeping this place alive, honoring your father's legacy, making something beautiful every single day even when it's hard. That takes a different kind of strength than climbing a corporate ladder. You really think that? I really do. Claire glanced at her watch and winced. I have to get to work. I have a meeting at 8:30 that I absolutely cannot miss. But Evan, I don't want this to be it. Last night, this morning, I want more of this. Yeah? Yeah. Are you free tonight, or is 4:30 too early for late nights to make sense? I'm free. I'll survive on caffeine and stubbornness. My 2 favorite food groups. She stood, gathering her purse and the to-go coffee he'd made her. There's a food truck pod on Division, nothing fancy, just good food and picnic tables, 7 o'clock? I'll be there. She kissed his cheek before leaving, a brief press of lips that somehow felt more intimate than anything else that had happened. Evan stood frozen for several seconds after the door closed behind her, his hand rising unconsciously to touch the spot she'd kissed. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Chen shuffled in, her usual time down to the minute. Good morning, Evan. You look different today. Different how? Happy, distracted, like maybe you met a girl. Her knowing smile was gentle. Your father used to get that same look when your mother would visit the bakery, like the whole world had shifted into focus. Evan felt his throat tighten. I miss him. I know you do, sweetheart, but he would be so proud of you. Not just for keeping this place running, but for living, for letting yourself have something beyond these four walls. She patted his hand. The usual sourdough, please, and maybe one of those cinnamon rolls. I have a feeling today is a special occasion. The morning rush started in earnest after that. The construction crew came in, then the teachers from the elementary school 3 blocks over, then the steady stream of regulars who'd been coming here since before Evan could remember. He served them all with his usual efficiency, but today there was a lightness to his movements that hadn't been there before. Around 9, the bell chimed again, and Evan looked up to see Michael standing in the doorway. His older brother looked like hell, pale, dark circles under his eyes, moving with the careful stiffness of someone still feeling the effects of serious illness. But the anger in his expression was perfectly healthy. "We need to talk," Michael said without preamble. "I'm working." "This can't wait." Evan glanced at the empty shop. The rush was over, and the next wave wouldn't hit until lunch. 5 minutes. In the back. They moved to the kitchen, the space that had been their father's domain, now Evan's. Michael leaned against the prep table, arms crossed, every line of his body radiating resentment. "You couldn't just deliver the apology and walk away?" "Hello to you too. You look terrible, by the way. Should you even be out of bed?" "Don't change the subject. Claire was supposed to be my date. I'm the one who spent weeks getting to know her, building rapport, making plans, and you just swoop in and steal her?" "I didn't steal anyone. We talked. We connected. She asked to see me again. That's not stealing. That's just what happened." "Because you lied to her. Let her think you were me." "I told her exactly who I was within the first 30 seconds. She knew I was your brother. She knew you were sick. She chose to keep talking to me anyway." Michael's jaw worked. "This isn't fair." "You're right. It's not fair. It's not fair that I spend my life doing what's expected, being the reliable one, the one who sacrifices what he wants so everyone else can have what they need. It's not fair that the one single time I meet someone who sees me as something other than useful, I'm supposed to step aside because you saw her first on a dating app. You don't even know her. Neither do you. You know the profile she wrote, the version of herself she shows to strangers online. I know what she sounds like when she laughs. I know she's tired of performing. I know she asks questions and actually listens to the answers. That's more real than anything you learned from swiping right." Michael's expression shifted from anger to something more complicated. "Mom's going to take my side on this." "Of course she is. She always takes your side. You're the successful one, the one with the career and the future and all the potential I'm supposedly wasting. But you know what? I don't care anymore. I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger." "That's not what this is about." "Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it's always been about. You want what you want, and everyone else is supposed to rearrange their lives to make it happen. Well, not this time. Claire isn't a thing you call dibs on. She's a person who gets to make her own choices, and she chose to see me again." "This isn't over," Michael said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "Yeah, it is. Go home, rest, get better. And when you're feeling human again, maybe think about why you're so angry that I might actually be happy for once." Michael left without another word, the bell chiming his exit. Evan stood in the kitchen for a long moment, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation. He'd never stood up to his brother like that, never claimed something for himself at Michael's expense. It felt terrifying and necessary and right. His phone buzzed. Another text from Claire. "Already counting down to tonight. Is that pathetic?" "That feels pathetic." He smiled despite the lingering tension. "If it's pathetic, we can be pathetic together. Fair warning, though. I'm probably going to be covered in flour and only semi-coherent from exhaustion." "That sounds perfect. See you at 7, flour and all." The rest of the day passed in a blur of baking and service and the kind of nervous anticipation Evan hadn't felt since high school. At 6, he closed up shop, showered in record time, and changed into clean jeans and his best flannel, which was only marginally less worn than the others. Division Street was alive with the dinner crowd when he arrived. The food truck pod packed with people seeking everything from Korean tacos to artisanal ice cream. He spotted Claire at a picnic table in the corner, 2 orders of something that smelled amazing already, waiting. "You're early," she said when he sat down. "So are you." "I may have left work at 4:30. My assistant looked scandalized. She pushed one of the containers toward him. Thai fusion. I got the Panang curry for you because you seem like someone who appreciates things that are both comforting and complex. Was I right? Disturbingly right. Evan took a bite and made an involuntary sound of appreciation. Okay, this is incredible. Right? I've been coming here for 6 months and I'm still finding new favorites. She paused, studying him. You look tired, and something's bothering you. How can you tell? You're doing that thing where you hold your shoulders like you're bracing for impact. What happened? So Evan told her about Michael's visit, about the confrontation, about finally saying out loud all the things he'd been thinking for years. Claire listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled as the story progressed. He's angry at you because I chose to see you again, she said when he finished. He's angry because he's used to getting what he wants, and I'm not used to wanting anything enough to fight for it. Evan, I need you to understand something. What happened last night, what's happening right now, it has nothing to do with your brother. I didn't choose you as some kind of consolation prize or because you were conveniently available. I chose you because talking to you feels like breathing. Like I can finally stop holding my breath and just exist. The words hit him somewhere deep. I feel that too, but it scares me. What scares you? That this is moving too fast, that I'm going to mess it up, that you're going to wake up one morning and realize you can do better than a baker who works 80 hours a week and lives in a studio apartment above his shop. Claire set down her fork, her gray eyes serious. Can I tell you something that might sound crazy? Please. I've been successful by every conventional measure. Good school, good job, good salary, good apartment in the right neighborhood. I did everything right, checked every box, built the life I was supposed to want. And you know what? I've never been more lonely in my entire life. My friends are all people I network with. My relationships have all been with men who looked good on paper and felt empty in practice. My days are full of accomplishments that don't mean anything to anyone, including me. She leaned forward, elbows on the picnic table, closing the distance between them. Then I meet you, and you're tired and frustrated and working yourself to death for a business that barely keeps you afloat. But when you talk about the bakery, about making bread, about carrying on your father's legacy, there's this passion in your voice, this sense of purpose. You know why you get up at 4:30 every morning? How many people can say that? It's not glamorous. I don't want glamorous. I want real. I want someone who shows up honestly, who tells me the truth about their life even when it's not impressive, who makes me feel like I can tell my own truth too. Your truth? Claire took a breath. I hate my job. Not all the time, not every day, but enough that I dread Monday mornings and count down to Friday afternoons. I'm good at it, and it pays well, and everyone keeps telling me I should be grateful. But I'm so tired of spending my days making rich people richer while I ignore every instinct that tells me there's more to life than optimizing profit margins. What would you rather be doing? I don't know. That's the terrifying part. I've been on this track for so long that I can't even imagine what else might be possible. All I know is that sitting here with you eating mediocre Thai food at a picnic table, I feel more alive than I have in months, maybe years. Evan reached across the table, taking her hand. Her fingers were cool, surprisingly calloused for someone who worked in an office. So what do we do with that? I think we keep showing up, keep being honest, see where this goes without trying to force it into a shape it's not ready for. She squeezed his hand. And maybe you could kiss me because I've been thinking about it since last night, and I'm rapidly losing my mind. He kissed her right there at the picnic table, with the smell of food trucks in the air and people all around them and the sun setting over Division Street. It was gentle and tentative and perfect, the kind of first kiss that promised more to come. When they pulled apart, Claire was smiling. Definitely worth the wait. We waited less than 24 hours. Felt like forever. They finished their food while the sky darkened, talking about everything and nothing. Claire told him about growing up in Seattle, about her parents' quiet divorce when she was 12, about deciding to major in finance because she was good with numbers, and it seemed practical. Evan told her about his father's long illness, about dropping out of culinary school to come home, about the guilt that still lived in his chest when he thought about Sarah and the life they'd planned. Do you regret it? Claire asked. Giving up culinary school? Sometimes. Mostly I regret that I didn't have a choice, My father needed me, and I came home because that's what you do for family. But I wonder sometimes what would have happened if he'd stayed healthy, if I'd finished school, worked in some fancy restaurant, maybe eventually opened my own place somewhere. If I'd gotten to choose this life instead of having it choose me. Would the bakery exist if you'd made a different choice? Probably not. Michael would have sold it, used the money for his career, his life, whatever. My dad's legacy would have died with him. Then maybe the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Maybe it was just you becoming who you were always meant to be, even if the path there was harder than it should have been. Evan looked at her in the gathering darkness, this woman who'd appeared in his life less than 24 hours ago and somehow already understood him better than people who'd known him for years. How are you real? I'm not sure I am. I might be having some kind of breakdown disguised as a breakthrough. Ask me again in a week when the initial rush wears off and reality sets in. What if reality setting in doesn't change anything? Then I guess we'll figure it out together. They walked to their cars slowly, neither ready for the night to end. In the parking lot, Claire leaned against her sedan, pulling Evan close with a boldness that made his heart race. I have a crazy idea, she said. I'm listening. Tomorrow's Friday. I could work from home, get everything done by noon, and then I'd have the whole afternoon free. And I was thinking maybe I could come to the bakery again. Not just for coffee this time. I want to see the whole operation. Maybe help, if you'd let me. Just spend time in your world. Claire, it's not glamorous. It's hot and exhausting, and you'd probably get flour everywhere. I know. That's why I want to do it. She kissed him again, slower this time, deeper. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. Say yes. Yes. Good. I'll be there at 1. And Evan, wear the old flannel, the one with the hole in the elbow. It's my favorite. She drove away before he could ask how she'd noticed that detail, leaving him standing in the parking lot with a smile he couldn't quite control and a feeling in his chest that might have been hope, or might have been terror, or might have been both at once. At home, he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion that lived in his bones. His phone lit up with a text from his mother. Michael told me what happened. We need to talk about this Claire situation. He typed back, nothing to talk about. I met someone. We're seeing where it goes. That's all. But Michael met her first. He has feelings for her. Michael has feelings about her. There's a difference. And either way, Claire gets to decide who she wants to spend time with. She chose me. I raised you better than to betray your brother like this. The words stung more than they should have. Evan stared at the message for a long time before responding. You raised me to always put family first, even when it meant giving up what I wanted. I'm done doing that. If you think that's betrayal, I can't change your mind. But I'm not apologizing for finally choosing myself. He turned off his phone after that, knowing his mother would keep texting, keep pushing, keep trying to guilt him back into his assigned role. But something had shifted in him, some fundamental understanding that he couldn't unlearn. Claire saw him, really saw him, not as the useful son or the reliable brother or the failing baker, but as a person with value beyond his utility to others. That was worth fighting for, worth disappointing people for, worth the risk of heartbreak and failure and all the terrifying unknowns that came with choosing to want something for himself. He set his alarm for 4:30 and fell asleep thinking about Claire in his kitchen, flour-dusted and laughing, fitting into his world like she'd been there all along. The morning routine felt different for the third day in a row, and Evan was beginning to understand that Claire had fundamentally altered something in him that couldn't be put back. The darkness was still dark. The flour still needed measuring. The dough still required the same careful attention it always had. But now there was a reason beyond obligation driving his hands, a future that included more than just survival. He worked with unusual precision that morning, aware that Claire would be seeing the full scope of his operation for the first time. The display case was stocked perfectly, the floors swept cleaner than necessary, the windows wiped down until they gleamed. Mrs. Chen noticed immediately when she arrived at her usual time. Spring cleaning in November? She asked, amusement dancing in her eyes. Just maintaining standards. Maintaining standards for a certain financial analyst who's been here 2 mornings in a row? She accepted her sourdough with a knowing smile. Your father did the same thing when he was courting your mother. Scrubbed this place top to bottom, reorganized the display 3 times, nearly drove himself crazy trying to make everything perfect. Did it work? She married him, didn't she? But Evan, sweetheart, the cleaning wasn't what won her over. It was watching him work, seeing the love he put into every loaf, understanding that this place was an extension of who he was at his core. If your Claire is worth keeping, she'll see that too. The flour on the floor won't matter. The word settled something in Evan's chest that had been anxious since he'd woken up. He thanked Mrs. Chen and returned to work, letting the familiar rhythm steady him through the morning rush and into the quiet afternoon lull. At 12:45, he started getting nervous. At 12:50, he checked his reflection in the steel refrigerator door and immediately regretted it. At 1 o'clock exactly, Claire's sedan pulled up outside, and Evan's heart did something acrobatic in his chest. She stepped out wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking somehow both more casual and more beautiful than she had in her work clothes. When she walked through the door, her smile was bright enough to compete with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. "I brought reinforcements," she said, holding up a bag. "Figured if I'm going to invade your workspace, I should at least contribute sustenance." "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. I've got sandwiches from that deli on Hawthorne, the good chips, and those chocolate chip cookies you definitely didn't make because I wanted to bring you something you couldn't create better yourself." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "Unless this is weird? Am I being weird?" "You're not being weird. Come here." He kissed her hello, brief and sweet, aware of the customers at the corner table who were definitely watching with interest. Claire's cheeks flushed pink when they pulled apart, and Evan felt absurdly pleased that he could make her blush. "So," she said, setting the bag on the counter, "put me to work. What can I do?" "Claire, you don't have to." "I want to. That's why I'm here. Teach me something. Let me be useful instead of just decorative." Evan studied her for a moment, seeing the genuine eagerness in her expression. "Okay, but fair warning, it's going to be messy and probably frustrating. Baking is basically controlled failure until you figure out what works." "That sounds exactly like my career, except the failure is less controlled and the results aren't edible." He laughed and led her to the kitchen, suddenly hyper-aware of how small the space was, how close they'd be working. "We're making focaccia. It's forgiving enough for a beginner, but impressive enough that you'll feel accomplished when it works." "What happens if it doesn't work?" "Then we eat delicious failure and try again tomorrow." Claire washed her hands at the industrial sink while Evan assembled ingredients. He talked her through the process, measuring flour, blooming yeast, the importance of salt not just for flavor but for structure. She listened with the same focused attention she'd given everything else, asking questions that showed she was actually processing the information rather than just being polite. "Why does the water temperature matter so much?" she asked, watching him test it with a thermometer. "Too hot, and you kill the yeast. Too cold, and it won't activate properly. You're looking for that sweet spot where the yeast wakes up and starts doing its thing, which is eating the sugars in the flour and releasing carbon dioxide, which creates all those air pockets that make bread light instead of dense. Basically, we're farming microscopic organisms and hoping they cooperate." Claire's eyes widened. "That's actually kind of amazing and slightly disturbing." "Welcome to baking. It's all controlled microbial warfare disguised as comfort food." They worked side by side, Evan's hands guiding hers through the process of mixing, kneading, feeling for the moment when the dough transformed from shaggy mess to smooth elasticity. Claire swore when the dough stuck to her fingers, laughed when flour poofed up into her face, and looked genuinely triumphant when Evan pronounced her kneading technique adequate. "Adequate?" she protested. "I was going for exceptional." "Adequate is exceptional for a first attempt. Most people either underknead and end up with dense bricks or overknead and create something with the texture of rubber. You found the middle ground." "Years of financial analysis have prepared me to find middle grounds." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of flour. "What now?" "Now we wait. The dough needs to rise for about an hour, which means we have time to eat those sandwiches you brought, and you can tell me about your morning." They sat at the small table in the corner of the kitchen, the one Evan usually ate at alone while scrolling through his phone. Claire unpacked the sandwiches, pastrami for him, turkey and avocado for her, and handed him a bag of salt and vinegar chips. "How did you know these are my favorite?" he asked. You mentioned last night that you like things that are both comforting and complex. Salt and vinegar is the chip equivalent of that philosophy. She took a bite of her sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. My morning was interesting. I had a meeting with the senior partners about a discrepancy I found in one of our client accounts. What kind of discrepancy? The kind where someone's been moving money around in ways that look legal on the surface, but are actually designed to hide assets from a divorce settlement. I brought it to my boss's attention 2 weeks ago, and he told me to let it go, that it wasn't our problem as long as the accounting was technically correct. But you couldn't let it go. How did you know? Evan smiled. Because you're the kind of person who stops at yellow lights instead of speeding through. You told me yourself you find the problems everyone wants to ignore. So what did you do? I compiled a full report and presented it directly to the senior partners this morning, bypassing my boss entirely. Showed them exactly what was happening and explained that if we don't address it, we're potentially liable for aiding in fraud. What did they say? Claire's expression was complicated. They thanked me for my diligence and told me they'd look into it. But I could see it in their faces. They weren't happy that I'd gone over my boss's head. I made things uncomfortable, made people look bad. That's not how you get ahead in corporate finance. That's how you sleep at night, though. Yeah, she met his eyes. My boss pulled me aside after and told me I need to learn to be more of a team player if I want to make partner. That pointing out problems makes me seem difficult to work with. That's bullshit. I know, but it's also reality. This is the third time in 6 months I've found something sketchy and reported it, and every time I get the same response. Technically, you're right, but practically you're making trouble. There's an art to knowing when to push and when to stay quiet, and apparently I haven't mastered it. Evan reached across the table, taking her hand. Maybe you're not supposed to master it. Maybe the fact that you can't stay quiet when you see something wrong is exactly who you should be, even if it makes your career harder. Easy to say when you're not the one facing down a conference room full of men who think ethics are negotiable. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it matters. You matter. The work you do, calling out the things other people want to ignore, that has value even if your bosses don't want to acknowledge it. Claire's eyes were suspiciously bright. How do you do that? Do what? Say exactly the thing I need to hear without making it sound like a platitude. Everyone else tells me to pick my battles or play the game or think about my future. You just tell me I'm right to care. Because you are right to care. And if caring too much about ethics makes you a bad fit for that firm, maybe the firm is the problem, not you. She was quiet for a moment, thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Whether I'm in the wrong career or just at the wrong company. Whether there's a version of this work that would feel meaningful instead of soul-crushing. What would meaningful look like? I don't know. Maybe working for a nonprofit, using my skills to help organizations that actually make a difference. Or consulting for small businesses that need financial guidance but can't afford the big firms. Something where the end result is helping real people instead of shuffling money between accounts for clients who already have more than they need. That sounds like it would pay less. A lot less. Which is why it's just a fantasy. I have student loans, rent in an expensive building, a lifestyle I've built around my current salary. Walking away would mean giving up a lot of security. Security doing something that makes you miserable. Security doing something I'm very good at, which is not the same as miserable. Most of the time it's just fine. Boring, but fine. And fine is enough for most people. Evan stood up, checking the dough, which had risen beautifully. Come here. I want to show you something. Claire joined him at the prep table, watching as he gently pressed his fingers into the dough, creating deep dimples across the surface. He drizzled olive oil over it, sprinkled sea salt and rosemary, then slid it into the oven. In about 25 minutes, that's going to come out golden and perfect. And you want to know the secret? What? There is no secret. It's just flour and water and yeast and time. Simple ingredients, simple process, but the result is something people have been making for thousands of years because it works, because it's true to what it is instead of trying to be something more complicated. You're using bread as a metaphor for my life choices. I'm using bread as a metaphor for everything. It's my only metaphor. I'm a simple man. Claire laughed, the sound filling the small kitchen. You're not simple. You're probably the most genuinely complex person I've ever met. You just hide it under flannel and flour, says the woman who hides a revolutionary under business casual. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm just tired of lying to myself about what I want. Then stop lying. Figure out what would make you happy and go after it. Just like that? Just like that. The timer went off before Claire could respond. Evan pulled the focaccia from the oven, the crust golden and glistening, the rosemary releasing its sharp, piney scent into the air. Claire made a sound of pure appreciation. We made that, she said, wonder in her voice. You made that. I just guided your hands. Evan, that's literally the first useful thing I've created in months. Everything I do at work is abstract. Numbers on screens, reports in databases, presentations that get filed away and forgotten. This is real. This is something we can touch and eat and share. She broke off a piece while it was still too hot, juggling it between her fingers before popping it in her mouth. Her eyes closed in pleasure, and Evan felt that same pull of attraction and something deeper, something like recognition. Okay, Claire said when she could speak again. I understand now why you do this, why you get up at 4:30 every morning even though it's exhausting and barely profitable. Because this feeling, making something this good, is worth it. It's not always worth it. Sometimes it's just grinding through another day, trying to keep the lights on, wondering if I'm wasting my life on something that doesn't matter to anyone but me. It matters to Mrs. Chen, to the construction guys, to everyone who comes here because they know what they're getting is made with actual care instead of mass-produced efficiency. She turned to face him fully. And it matters to me, getting to see this, to be part of it, even just for an afternoon. This is the most real thing I've done in longer than I can remember. Evan kissed her then, tasting rosemary and salt and something sweet underneath. She kissed him back with an urgency that suggested she'd been wanting to do this since she walked in, and they stayed like that for several long moments, pressed together in the small kitchen that smelled like bread and possibility. The bell above the front door chimed, announcing a customer. They broke apart, both slightly breathless, and Evan forced himself to step back even though everything in him wanted to keep her close. I should get that, he said. I should probably head out anyway. I told myself I'd only stay a couple hours, and it's already past 3. You don't have to go. I know, but I want to leave while this is still perfect, before reality has a chance to creep in and ruin it. She gathered her things, then paused. Can I take some of the focaccia? Show my roommate that I accomplished something today besides neglecting my actual job? Take as much as you want. You made it. She wrapped half the focaccia in the parchment paper Evan provided, moving with surprising efficiency for someone who'd never worked in a bakery before. At the door, she turned back one more time. Tomorrow's Saturday. You're closed Sundays, right? Right. So Saturday night, we could actually stay up late without you having to be functional at 4:30 the next morning. What if we did something? Nothing fancy, just dinner and maybe a movie, normal date things. That sounds perfect. Yeah? Her smile was hopeful. Yeah. Pick me up at 7? It's a date, a real official normal date where neither of us has work the next day, and we can just be two people getting to know each other without the pressure of stolen moments and borrowed time. She left before he could respond, and Evan returned to the front to help the customer, a regular who wanted his usual sandwich and couldn't resist commenting that Evan seemed awfully happy for a Friday afternoon. He brushed off the observation, but the smile lingered through the rest of the day, through closing up shop, through the evening routine he usually found tedious. His phone rang as he was heading upstairs. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Evan considered ignoring it, then answered on the 4th ring. What do you want? To apologize. Michael's voice sounded rough, like he'd been thinking about this conversation for a while. I was an ass the other day. You're right. I don't know Claire. I know the idea of her, the version I built up in my head from our messages. But that's not the same as actually knowing someone. No, it's not. And you deserve to be happy. I know I don't say that enough, or ever, really, but you do. You've given up a lot for this family, for the bakery, for all of us. If Claire makes you happy, I should be supporting that instead of acting like you stole something from me. The apology was so unexpected that Evan didn't know how to respond immediately. What brought this on? Mom came over last night, Started in on this whole thing about how you were betraying family values, how I needed to fight for what was mine, how Claire was confused and needed guidance back to the right choice. And listening to her talk, watching her try to manipulate the situation, I realized that's exactly what she's always done. Pitted us against each other, made everything a competition, convinced both of us that there wasn't enough love or success or happiness to go around. Michael, let me finish. I'm the older brother. I'm supposed to look out for you, not treat you like competition. And instead, I've spent years measuring my success by how much better I'm doing than you. How much more Mom brags about my career, how much more impressive my life looks from the outside. That's messed up. We're messed up. This whole family dynamic is messed up. Evan sank onto his bed, phone pressed to his ear. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I'm done competing with you. I'm done treating your happiness like it comes at my expense. If things work out with Claire, I'll be happy for you. And if they don't, I'll be there for you. That's what brothers should do. Are you dying? Is this a deathbed confession? Michael laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I'm not dying. I'm just tired of being the person Mom raised me to be instead of the person I should have been all along. That's surprisingly profound for someone who spent the last 3 days with the flu. Fever gives you perspective. Also, I watched a lot of therapy TikToks while I was stuck in bed, and apparently our family dynamic is textbook toxic. Welcome to the club. I figured that out about 3 years ago. So we're okay? You and me? Evan thought about it, really thought about it. The years of comparison and competition, the resentment that had built up like sediment, the fundamental loneliness of being in a family where love felt conditional on achievement. None of that disappeared with one phone call, but maybe it was a start. We're okay, he said finally. Or we will be, if you actually mean what you're saying. I mean it. And Evan, take Claire on a real date. Somewhere nice. Let me Venmo you some money. Absolutely not. Come on. You know I make more than you, which is exactly why I'm not taking your money. I can afford to take her out. It might not be the fanciest place in Portland, but it'll be real, and that seems to be what she values anyway. She's good for you. I can tell just from how you sound when you talk about her. Yeah, she is. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, then ended the call with a promise to get coffee sometime soon. Evan sat in the quiet of his apartment, processing the conversation, the shift in family dynamics that felt both overdue and fragile. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Just tried to explain to my roommate why I spent my afternoon making bread instead of working. She thinks I'm having a breakdown. I think I might be having a breakthrough. Either way, this focaccia is incredible and I can't stop eating it. He smiled and typed back, breakdown, breakthrough, same thing when you're changing your life. How do you feel about Italian food? Love it. Why? Because there's this place in Selwood, family-owned, nothing fancy, but the food is incredible. Thought we could go there tomorrow night for our official normal date. That sounds perfect. Pick me up at 7? I'll text you my address. It's a date. Evan fell asleep that night with the kind of cautious optimism he'd trained himself not to feel. The dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, things were actually going to work out. That Claire wasn't going to wake up and realize he was just a baker with flour under his fingernails and a business that barely broke even. That Michael actually meant the things he'd said about being supportive. That the careful walls Evan had built around his heart for protection were finally safe enough to come down. The next morning felt different in yet another way. Saturday meant a slightly later start, 5 instead of 4:30, and a lighter crowd since most of his regulars were weekday warriors. Evan took his time with the morning prep, making a special batch of cinnamon rolls because Claire had loved them and he wanted to bring her some later. The day passed in a pleasant blur of regular customers and peaceful work. At 6, he closed up shop, showered, and stood in front of his closet with the sudden realization that he had no idea what to wear on an actual date. Everything he owned was casual at best, worn at worst. Finally, he settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that wasn't flannel, adding a jacket that he'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago and barely worn since. Claire's address led him to a modern apartment building in the Pearl District, the kind of place with a doorman and abstract art in the lobby. He texted that he'd arrived, suddenly conscious of his old truck parked among the sleek sedans and electric vehicles in the visitor spaces. When Claire emerged from the elevator, Evan forgot how to breathe for a second. She wore a deep green dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and casual, her hair down in loose waves, heels that brought her nearly to his height. But it was her smile when she saw him that really stopped his heart, genuine and bright and a little nervous. "Hi," she said, joining him by the truck. "Hi yourself. You look incredible. You clean up pretty well yourself. I wasn't sure you owned anything that wasn't flannel." "I own exactly one outfit that isn't flannel. You're looking at it." She laughed and climbed into the passenger seat, not seeming bothered by the truck's age or the faint smell of yeast that probably lingered despite his best efforts to clean. Evan drove towards Selwood while Claire told him about her day. Lazy morning, catching up on reading, her roommate's continued concern about the focaccia incident. "She thinks I'm in the manic phase of a mental breakdown," Claire said. She pulled up articles about early warning signs and everything. "Are you in the manic phase of a mental breakdown?" "I don't think so. But apparently one of the signs is not recognizing it, so I'm not a reliable witness. For what it's worth, you seem pretty grounded to me." "That's because you don't know what I'm usually like. I'm the person who has everything scheduled, everything planned, everything under control. I don't take random afternoons off to make bread. I don't go on dates with men I just met. I definitely don't spend all my free time thinking about whether I should quit my job and do something completely different with my life." "But you're thinking about that?" Claire was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking about a lot of things. About what makes me happy versus what I thought was supposed to make me happy. About whether security is worth the cost if the cost is feeling dead inside most of the time. About whether meeting you is a catalyst for changes I was already ready to make, or just a convenient excuse to blow up my life. Heavy thoughts for a Saturday night. I know, I'm sorry. I promised myself I'd be normal tonight, and instead I'm already spiraling into existential crisis territory." Evan reached over and took her hand. "Claire, you don't have to be normal with me. You don't have to be anything except exactly who you are, heavy thoughts and all. That's kind of the whole point of this, isn't it? Finding someone you don't have to perform for." Her fingers tightened around his. "How are you so good at this?" "At what?" "At saying the exact right thing. At making me feel seen instead of judged. At being okay with all the messy, complicated parts instead of wanting me to package them into something more palatable. Because the messy, complicated parts are my favorite parts. The polished, professional version of you is impressive, but it's not real. This version, the one who makes impulsive decisions and questions everything and shows up covered in flour, this is the one I want to know." They pulled up to Stella's, a small Italian restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, the kind of place that had probably been there for decades and would hopefully be there for decades more. The interior was warm and slightly cramped, with red checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles and the comforting smell of garlic and tomato sauce. The hostess greeted Evan by name, which made Claire raise her eyebrows. "You're a regular here?" "My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid. After he died, I kept coming back. Reminds me of him, I guess. The owner, Maria, she knew my family. Sometimes she still tries to feed me extra because she thinks I'm too thin." As if summoned by the mention of her name, a woman in her 60s emerged from the kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw Evan. She pulled him into a hug that he returned with obvious affection, then turned her attention to Claire with undisguised curiosity. "So you finally bring a girl," Maria said, her accent still thick despite decades in America. "I tell him for years, Evan, you work too much, you need to live a little, and now here you are with this beautiful woman. You sit, I bring you the good wine." She disappeared before either of them could protest, leaving them at a corner table with a view of the street. Claire was smiling, something soft in her expression. "She loves you." "She loved my dad. I'm just the inherited son she gets to fuss over now." "No, she loves you. You can see it in how she looks at you, like you matter." The wine arrived, along with bread that was still warm and olive oil for dipping. They ordered ossobuco for Evan, mushroom risotto for Claire, and settled into the comfortable rhythm of conversation that had become familiar over the past few days. "Tell me something," Claire said, tearing off a piece of bread. "If you could do anything with the bakery, money and logistics no object, what would you do?" Evan considered the question, really considered it, instead of giving the reflexive answer about just keeping it alive. "I'd expand. Not huge, but enough to have a proper cafe area where people could sit and stay instead of just grabbing something to go. I'd hire help so I'm not doing everything myself. Maybe offer baking classes on weekends, teach people the basics so they could make their own bread at home. And I'd love to partner with local farms, use seasonal ingredients, create specialty items that change with what's available. That sounds amazing. What's stopping you? Money, mostly. The building next door has been empty for 2 years, and the landlord wants more than I could ever afford. Even if I could buy it, the renovation costs would be insane. And hiring help means I need to be making enough to pay people properly, which I'm not. The margins in baking are razor thin unless you're charging boutique prices, and I can't do that to my regulars. They need affordable bread, not artisanal $12 loaves. What if you did both? Keep the regular items at accessible prices, but add a specialty line for people who can afford to pay more? That's the plan, theoretically, but it requires time and energy I don't have when I'm working 80 hours a week just to maintain what exists now. It's a catch-22. I need to expand to be sustainable, but I can't expand without resources I don't have. Claire's expression had shifted into something focused, the same look she'd had when talking about finding discrepancies in client accounts. Have you looked into small business loans, grants for local food businesses? There are programs specifically designed to help places like yours. I've looked. Most of them require extensive business plans, projected earnings, proof of concept. And honestly, I don't have the background for that kind of thing. I know how to make bread. I don't know how to convince a loan officer that my little bakery is worth investing in when half of all restaurants fail in the first 5 years. But you're not a restaurant. You're a bakery that's been operating successfully for how long? 23 years total. 15 under my dad, 8 under me. That's not a risky venture, Evan. That's a proven business with an established customer base and room for growth. Any decent financial analyst would see the potential there. Any decent financial analyst would also see that the current owner is barely keeping his head above water and has no formal business training. The current owner is also incredibly skilled at what he does, passionate about the product, and clearly capable of running a successful operation despite having the odds stacked against him. Claire leaned forward, intensity in her voice. What if I helped you? Put together a real business plan, show you what you'd need to qualify for financing, maybe even connect you with some resources I know about. Claire, you can't just fix my business problems because we're dating. I'm not trying to fix your problems. I'm offering to use my skills to help you articulate a vision you already have, but don't know how to present. That's literally what I do for a living, except usually I'm doing it for people who don't need the money and are just trying to hoard more wealth. Why shouldn't I use those same skills to help someone who's actually creating value in his community? Their food arrived, saving Evan from having to respond immediately. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the tension between them not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Finally, Evan set down his fork. I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I need you to understand something. I've spent my whole life being the person people try to fix or improve or guide toward their version of success. My mom wants me to sell the bakery and get a real job. Michael thinks I'm wasting my potential. My ex-girlfriend saw me as a project, someone with raw talent who just needed the right partner to reach his full potential. I'm so tired of being someone's improvement project. Claire's face fell. That's not what I meant. I know, but it's how it feels. Like you're looking at my life and seeing all the ways it could be better if I just tried harder or thought bigger or let you apply your expertise to my problems. You're right. She pushed her risotto around her plate, not eating. I'm doing exactly what I hate when other people do it to me. Assuming I know better, assuming my skills are the solution to someone else's problems. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just be my girlfriend instead of my business consultant. Let me figure out the bakery stuff on my own timeline, in my own way. Even if that way is slower and messier than you'd do it. Girlfriend? Claire repeated, a small smile breaking through. Is that what I am? I mean, we've been on exactly 1.5 real dates, so maybe that's presumptuous. But yeah, if you want to be, that's what I'd like you to be. I want to be. But Evan, I need you to understand something too. I'm used to solving problems. It's what I'm good at. It's how my brain works. And sometimes I'm going to see solutions and want to share them. That doesn't mean I think you're broken or that I'm trying to fix you. It means I care about you and I want to help if I can. I know, And I'm used to being defensive about help because it usually comes with strings attached or judgment about why I needed it in the first place. We're both going to have to work on this. That seems fair. Claire took a sip of wine, then met his eyes. For what it's worth, I don't think you're wasting your potential. I think you're one of the only people I know who's actually living according to their values instead of just talking about them. That takes more courage than climbing any corporate ladder. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that: favorite movies, worst first date stories, the weirdness of Portland's weather. But something had shifted between them. A recognition that this thing they were building wasn't going to be simple or easy. They were two people with different backgrounds and different defense mechanisms, and different ideas about what success looked like, trying to figure out if their differences were complementary or incompatible. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront. Portland's bridges lit up against the dark sky. Claire slipped her hand into Evan's, and the simple gesture felt momentous somehow, a claiming of space in each other's lives. "Can I ask you something potentially heavy?" Claire said after several minutes of comfortable silence. "Sure." "What scares you most about this? About us?" Evan didn't answer immediately, watching the Willamette River flow past, dark and eternal. "That you're going to get tired of slumming it with the baker. That the novelty of my simple life is going to wear off and you're going to realize you're bored. That I'm not going to be enough to keep you interested once the initial excitement fades. That's not fair to either of us. I know, but it's what happened before and I don't know how to not prepare for it to happen again." "With your ex, the one from culinary school?" "Yeah, Sarah, she loved the idea of me, the passionate chef, the dedication to craft, all of that. But she didn't love the reality. The early mornings, the exhaustion, the fact that I chose obligation over ambition when my dad got sick. She wanted the romance of dating an artist without the unglamorous parts that come with actually being one. I'm not Sarah. I know you're not, but you're still a woman with a high-powered career and options and a life that doesn't include flower-dusted apartments and 4:30 wake-up calls. Eventually, you're going to want more than I can give you." Claire stopped walking, pulling him to face her. The bridge lights reflected in her gray eyes, making them seem luminous. "Evan Brooks, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The things you think are going to drive me away are exactly the things that make me want to stay. Your dedication to your work, even when it's hard. Your loyalty to your father's memory, even when it costs you. Your refusal to pretend to be something you're not just to impress people. That's not slumming it. That's being with someone who has integrity. You say that now. I say that now, and I'll say it in 6 months, and I'll say it in a year. Yes, we're different. Yes, we come from different worlds, but maybe that's the point. Maybe we each have something the other needs to learn. What do I have to teach you? How to value the present over the future. How to make something with your hands instead of just manipulating abstractions on a screen. How to be content with enough instead of always chasing more." She paused, her voice softening. "How to be honest about what I want instead of what I think I should want. And what do you want? Right now? I want to kiss you on this bridge and not worry about whether we're moving too fast or if this is sustainable or any of the 1,000 other anxieties my brain keeps trying to throw at me. I just want to be here with you and let that be enough." So Evan kissed her there on the waterfront, with the city lights reflecting off the water and the sound of traffic humming in the background and the future stretching out uncertain and terrifying and full of possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Claire was smiling. "Take me home?" she asked. "Your place or mine?" "Yours. I want to see where you actually live, not just where you work." The drive back to the bakery felt weighted with anticipation and nervousness. Evan found himself acutely aware of every shabby detail as he led Claire up the narrow stairs to his studio apartment. The peeling paint in the stairwell, the creaky fourth step, the door that stuck slightly when you tried to open it. Inside was worse. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen, with a tiny bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. Secondhand furniture that had been old when he'd gotten it. Books stacked on every available surface because he had no shelves. The pervasive smell of yeast and vanilla that no amount of cleaning could entirely eliminate. "I know it's not much," he started, but Claire cut him off. "It's you. That's what makes it perfect." She moved through the space with genuine interest, examining his small collection of cookbooks, The photos on the wall of his father in the bakery, the sourdough starter bubbling away on the counter that he fed religiously, even though it meant one more daily obligation. "This is Herman," Evan said, gesturing to the jar of starter. "He's older than I am. My dad started him from scratch 30 years ago, and I've been maintaining him ever since Dad died. If I forget to feed him, he dies, and with him goes 3 decades of accumulated culture and flavor complexity." That's a lot of pressure. It's also a connection. Every loaf I make with Herman is connected to every loaf my dad made. It's like he's still here in some small way, helping me bake. Claire touched the jar gently, reverently. "Does your mom know about this?" "She knows I have a starter. She doesn't understand why I'm so obsessive about it. To her, it's just more evidence that I'm stuck in the past instead of moving forward. Or maybe it's evidence that you understand continuity and legacy in a way she doesn't, that you value connection to what came before, even as you're building something new." They sat on Evan's worn couch, close enough that their shoulders touched, and talked into the late hours. Claire told him about her childhood in Seattle, about parents who'd divorced so quietly she almost didn't notice until her father had moved out, about choosing finance because she was good at math, and it seemed practical, about building a successful career that felt increasingly hollow. Evan told her about the year his father was sick, about dropping out of culinary school to come home, about the complicated grief of losing someone slowly while also resenting them for dying and leaving you with obligations you never wanted, about Sarah's departure and the relief mixed with heartbreak when she left. "Do you ever talk to her?" Claire asked. "Your ex?" "No. Last I heard she was in Napa, married to the vineyard guy, living the life she wanted. I hope she's happy. I just don't need to know about it." "Do you still love her?" "I don't think I ever really loved her. I loved the idea of us, the future we were planning. But the actual person? I'm not sure I ever knew her well enough to love her. She kept parts of herself hidden, and I did the same, and we were both too young to realize that intimacy requires vulnerability, not just shared plans." "And us?" Claire's voice was quiet. "Are we being vulnerable enough?" "I think so. I've told you things I haven't told anyone, about feeling trapped, about resenting my family, about being scared that I'm wasting my life on a business that's never going to be anything more than barely sustainable. That's pretty vulnerable. So I've told you I hate my job and I'm questioning my entire career and I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my life for years. That's terrifying to admit out loud." "So we're both terrified. That seems like a good foundation." Claire laughed, the sound tired but genuine. She glanced at her phone and winced. "It's past midnight. I should probably head home before I fall asleep on your couch." "You could stay." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than the simple offer warranted. Claire met his eyes, searching for something. "I want to," she said carefully, "but I also want to do this right. Not rush into something we're not ready for just because it feels good in the moment." "That's very mature of you." "I'm trying to be an adult about this, even though everything in me wants to be completely reckless." She stood, gathering her purse. "Rain check?" "Rain check." Evan walked her to her car, kissed her goodnight with the kind of restraint that felt like its own kind of torture, and watched her drive away before heading back upstairs. The apartment felt emptier than it had before she'd been there, her absence somehow more present than when he'd been alone. He set his alarm for 5. One of the few perks of Saturday nights was the slightly later Sunday start, and lay in bed replaying the evening. The conversation at dinner about the bakery's future, the way she'd looked at him on the bridge, the careful vulnerability of sharing his space with her. His phone buzzed with a text. "Thank you for tonight, for being patient with me, for understanding that wanting to take things slow doesn't mean I don't want them. It just means I want to get this right." He typed back, "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. That's what scares me. You're so solid, so certain, and I'm still figuring everything out. What if I can't match that? You don't have to match anything. You just have to show up honestly. That's all I'm asking. I can do that. Good night, Evan. Good night, Claire." Sunday morning felt strange, the luxury of sleeping past 4:30, the quiet of a closed bakery, the sense of unstructured time that Evan rarely experienced. He made coffee, fed Herman, and sat in the weak November sun coming through his window, trying to imagine what it would be like to have mornings like this regularly, to not be exhausted, to have space in his life for more than just work and sleep. His phone rang around 10. His mother. "Hi, Mom. We need to talk about this Claire situation." "There's nothing to talk about. I'm dating her. She's dating me. That's it." "Michael is very hurt, Evan. You know he saw her first." "Michael met her on a dating app. They exchanged messages. That's not the same as a relationship, and it definitely doesn't give him some kind of claim on her. It's the principle of the matter. Brothers don't do this to each other. Brothers also don't expect each other to give up their own happiness for the sake of some imaginary code. Mom, I love you, but I'm done having this conversation. Claire and I are together. If that bothers you, I'm sorry, but it's not going to change." "Your father would be so disappointed." The words hit like a physical blow, sharp and precise. Evan took a breath, fighting back the anger and hurt that threatened to overwhelm him. "Dad would want me to be happy. He spent his whole life building something meaningful, and he'd understand why I'm doing the same. If you can't see that, that's your problem, not mine." He ended the call before she could respond, hands shaking with adrenaline. The phone rang again immediately. He silenced it, then turned it off completely, needing the quiet to process the conversation. A knock at the door startled him an hour later. He wasn't expecting anyone, and very few people even knew where he lived. When he opened it, Claire stood there holding a bag from a bagel place and 2 coffees. "I know you're closed today and you probably want to sleep in or whatever, but I woke up thinking about you and I wanted to see you, and I maybe should have called first, but I was already in the car, so here I am being spontaneous and possibly clingy, and I can leave if you want space." Evan pulled her inside and kissed her, relieved and grateful, and something that felt dangerously close to falling. When they finally broke apart, Claire was smiling. "So not clingy then?" "Perfect amount of clingy. How did you know where I live?" "You pointed out the window last night, said your place was right above the bakery. I took a calculated risk that there was only one door marked private." They sat on the floor eating bagels because Evan's couch was covered in clean laundry he hadn't bothered to fold. Claire told him about her morning, yoga class, farmer's market, the growing conviction that she needed to make some serious changes in her life. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," she said, "about the bakery, about expansion, about all of it. And I know I promised not to be your business consultant, but I can't stop thinking about the potential there. Claire, just hear me out. What if you let me do this as a project? Not for you, for me. I need something to work on that feels meaningful, and putting together a business plan for the bakery would be exactly that. You don't have to use it, you don't have to do anything with it, but let me try. Let me see if I can help make your vision a reality." "Why does this matter so much to you?" "Because I need to prove to myself that my skills can be used for good instead of just shuffling money around. Because I see what you're building and I want to be part of it, even if it's just on the planning side. Because helping you succeed would make me feel like I'm contributing something valuable to the world." She paused, vulnerability clear in her face. "And because I'm falling for you, and this is how I show love, by trying to solve problems and make things better. I know it's not always helpful, but it's who I am." Evan set down his coffee, processing her words. "You're falling for me." "Did you miss that part?" "No, I definitely caught that part. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm allowed to say it back or if that's too intense for week 1 of dating." Week 1 of dating doesn't usually involve spending every available moment together and sharing our deepest fears and insecurities. I think we're past normal timeline rules. Then yeah, I'm falling for you too, which is terrifying because I've done this before and it didn't work out, and I'm scared of getting hurt again, but also not falling for you doesn't feel like an option at this point. Claire moved closer, fitting herself against his side in the way that was already becoming familiar. "So we're both scared and falling anyway. That's probably healthy, right? Or it's the definition of reckless." "I'm okay with reckless if you are." They spent the rest of Sunday together, the kind of lazy domestic day that felt both ordinary and precious. Claire helped him finally fold his laundry while he told her stories about growing up in the bakery, about learning to braid challah at 8 years old, about the time he accidentally added salt instead of sugar to a batch of cookies, and his father made him serve them anyway as a lesson about checking his measurements. In the afternoon, they walked to a nearby park, the November air crisp and clean. Claire talked about her plans to request a meeting with the senior partners, to make her case for why the firm needed to take ethics more seriously, even if it cost them clients. That could backfire spectacularly, Evan said. I know, but I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. Either they'll listen and make changes, or they won't and I'll know it's time to leave. Either way, at least I'll have been honest about where I stand. When did you get so brave? When I met someone who showed me what it looks like to live according to your values instead of just talking about them. She squeezed his hand. You're inspiring, even if you don't see it. As evening approached and Claire reluctantly prepared to leave for the week ahead, Evan felt the weight of Monday morning looming. Back to the 4:30 alarm, back to the relentless routine, back to the reality of running a struggling business with no clear path forward. But something had shifted. The routine didn't feel quite as suffocating when he had Claire's texts to look forward to, her promised visits to break up the monotony. The struggle didn't feel quite as lonely when someone else understood what he was fighting for and why it mattered. I'll see you tomorrow? Claire asked at her car. I open at 7. Then I'll be there at 7, assuming that's not too clingy. Claire, you could show up every single day and it wouldn't be too clingy. I'm already planning my mornings around the hope that you'll walk through that door. She kissed him one more time, sweet and lingering, then drove away into the Sunday evening traffic. Evan climbed back up to his apartment, the space feeling less empty than it had before, charged with the possibility of a future that included more than just survival. He fed Herman, prepared his clothes for the morning, and set his alarm for 4:30. But this time, when the exhaustion pulled at him, there was something else underneath it, something that felt dangerously like hope. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both surreal and surprisingly natural. Claire showed up at the bakery most mornings before work, arriving just as Evan was pulling the first loaves from the oven. She'd perch on her usual stool with coffee and whatever pastry he'd set aside for her, asking questions about his process while she answered emails on her phone. Sometimes she stayed for 20 minutes, sometimes an hour, but her presence became as much a part of his morning routine as measuring flour and kneading dough. On her end, things at the firm were deteriorating exactly as she'd predicted. The senior partners had listened politely to her concerns about ethics and accountability, then promptly ignored everything she'd said. Worse, they'd started excluding her from important meetings, routing work around her, making it clear that her honesty had earned her a reputation as difficult rather than principled. They're freezing me out, Claire told Evan one evening in late November, sitting in the bakery after closing while he prepped for the next day. My boss actually said I needed to decide whether I wanted to be right or whether I wanted to be successful. Like, those are mutually exclusive concepts. What did you say? I said I wanted to be able to sleep at night, which apparently was the wrong answer. She traced patterns in the flour dust on the table. I think I'm going to quit. Evan's hands stilled in the dough he was kneading. That's a big decision. I know, but I can't keep doing this. Every day I show up feels like I'm betraying myself a little more, and I have enough savings to float me for a few months while I figure out what's next. What is next? I don't know yet, but I've been thinking about what you said about using my skills to help people who actually need them. There are organizations that provide free financial consulting to small businesses and nonprofits. I could do that while I figure out my long-term plan. That would mean a massive pay cut. It would mean doing work that matters. I think that's worth more than the paycheck. She paused, meeting his eyes. Unless you think I'm being reckless. I know we've only been together for a few weeks, and maybe I shouldn't be making major life decisions when I'm in the honeymoon phase of a new relationship. I think you've been unhappy for a lot longer than a few weeks, and meeting me just gave you permission to admit it. That's not reckless. That's finally being honest with yourself. Even if it means I can't afford my fancy apartment anymore, even if I have to move somewhere cheaper, downsize my whole life. Claire, I live in a studio above a bakery and drive a truck that's older than I am. Do you really think I care about your apartment? She laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. No, I guess you don't, but I care. Or I did. I'm not sure anymore what matters and what's just conditioning from years of believing success looks a certain way. Then take some time to figure it out. Quit the job if it's making you miserable. You're brilliant and skilled and you'll land on your feet. You have a lot of faith in me. Someone needs to. You're too busy doubting yourself to see how capable you actually are. Claire came around the table and kissed him, tasting like coffee and the cinnamon roll she'd eaten earlier. When she pulled back, her expression was determined. I'm giving my notice tomorrow. 2 weeks, professionally done, no burned bridges. And then I'm going to figure out what comes next. She did exactly that. The fallout at her firm was immediate and ugly. Her boss tried to convince her to stay, then got angry when she refused, then made passive-aggressive comments about her throwing away her career for a man. Claire held firm, finished her 2 weeks with dignity, and walked out on a Friday afternoon in early December with a box of her belongings and a sense of relief so profound it was almost frightening. Evan picked her up in his truck, Herman, the sourdough starter, riding carefully secured in the passenger footwell, because Claire had insisted on meeting Evan's parents that weekend, and bringing bread felt appropriate. Are you nervous? Claire asked as they drove toward the suburbs, where his mother still lived in the house Evan had grown up in. Terrified. My mom hasn't spoken to me since I told her about us. This whole lunch was Michael's idea. He thought it might help smooth things over. And you agreed to this, why? Because he asked me to. And because at some point we have to deal with family stuff instead of just avoiding it. What if she hates me? She's going to hate you regardless of what you do because you're not the person she wanted me to be with, which is nobody, because that would mean I stayed focused on the bakery and didn't get distracted by things like happiness or personal fulfillment. Claire reached over and took his hand. Well, when you put it like that, I feel so much better. Michael met them at the door, looking healthier than he had in weeks. He'd put the weight back on, lost the sick pallor, and when he greeted Claire, it was with genuine warmth rather than resentment. So you're the woman who stole my brother's heart, he said, shaking her hand. I prefer to think I borrowed it with intent to keep, Claire replied, and Michael laughed. Their mother was in the kitchen, moving around with the nervous energy of someone who'd been cooking all day to avoid thinking about the gathering ahead. She looked up when they entered, her expression carefully neutral as it landed on Claire. You must be Claire. I'm Linda. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Brooks. Thank you for having me. Claire held out the loaf Evan had made that morning. We brought bread. Linda took it with obvious reluctance, as if accepting gifts from her son's girlfriend would somehow signal approval she wasn't ready to give. The lunch that followed was excruciatingly awkward, filled with the kind of small talk that felt more like a minefield than conversation. Finally, over dessert that nobody was really eating, Linda set down her fork and looked directly at Claire. I need to understand something. What exactly do you see in my son? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Evan started to object, but Claire put a hand on his arm, silencing him gently. I see someone who gets up at 4:30 every morning to do work that matters to him, even when it's hard and unrewarding and nobody appreciates it. I see someone who honored his father's legacy by keeping the bakery alive when it would have been easier to sell it and move on. I see someone who's kind to his customers, patient with his family even when they don't deserve it, and honest about who he is instead of pretending to be something more impressive. You don't think he's wasting his potential? I think potential is a word people use when they're uncomfortable with someone else's choices. Evan isn't wasting anything. He's building something real and meaningful, and the fact that it doesn't come with a corporate title or impressive salary doesn't make it less valuable. Linda's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or might have been grudging respect. You really believe that? I quit my job 3 weeks ago because I finally realized that impressive careers don't mean anything if you're miserable doing them. Evan helped me see that. So yes, I really believe it. What are you doing now if you're not working? Consulting for nonprofits and small businesses that need financial help but can't afford traditional firms. I make about a third of what I used to, and I've never been happier. Michael had been quiet through most of this, but now he spoke up. Mom, I need to say something too. I've spent years measuring my success against Evan's, feeling superior because I have the better job and the bigger paycheck. But watching him these past few weeks, seeing how happy he is with Claire, I realized I don't have anything like that. My job is fine, my life is fine, everything's fine. But Evan has something real. He has purpose and passion, and now he has someone who sees him for who he actually is. That's not failure. That's success in the only way that actually matters. Linda looked between her sons, something complicated working across her face. Your father would have been proud of you, she said finally, looking at Evan. Not because of the bakery specifically, but because you chose to honor what he built instead of taking the easy way out. I've been so focused on wanting you to have security that I forgot security isn't worth anything if you're miserable. Does this mean you're okay with me and Claire? I'm trying to be. It's hard letting go of the version of your life I had planned for you, but I can see she makes you happy, and that has to count for something. It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was progress. They left an hour later, Evan feeling lighter than he had in months. In the truck, Claire leaned against his shoulder. That went better than expected. You were amazing, the way you stood up to her, the things you said about me. I just told her the truth. You're all those things, Evan. I'm sorry it took your own mother so long to see it. December deepened into the kind of wet cold that Portland specialized in. Claire moved out of her expensive Pearl District apartment and into a smaller place in Evan's neighborhood, a studio similar to his own, but with slightly better light and a kitchen she actually wanted to use. They fell into an easy domesticity, trading off cooking dinners, spending evenings reading or watching movies, or just talking about their days. The bakery started changing too, in small ways at first. Claire had worked up a basic business plan despite Evan's protests, and looking at the numbers laid out professionally made him realize that expansion wasn't as impossible as he'd thought. With some careful planning and a small business loan, he could actually make it work. He started the loan application process in January, working late nights after the bakery closed to put together the required documentation. Claire helped when he asked, but mostly stayed out of it, understanding that he needed to do this himself to prove he could. The loan came through in February, a smaller amount than he'd hoped for, but enough to hire part-time help and start looking at the empty space next door. The landlord, perhaps sensing that Evan finally had backing, agreed to a reasonable lease with an option to buy if the expansion proved successful. By March, Evan had hired 2 part-time bakers, a recent culinary school graduate named Tessa, who reminded him of his younger self, and a semi-retired professional named Marcus, who brought 30 years of experience and a patient teaching style. For the first time since taking over the bakery, Evan didn't have to do everything himself. The change was disorienting at first. After 8 years of solitary mornings, having other people in his space felt intrusive. But gradually he adjusted, learning to delegate, to trust that Tessa and Marcus could maintain the quality standards he'd set. And slowly, carefully, he began reclaiming pieces of his life that had been consumed by work. He started sleeping past 4:30 on Sundays, actually taking his day off instead of using it to catch up on prep work. He and Claire took weekend trips to the coast, to wine country, to small towns they'd never visited. He read books for pleasure instead of falling asleep within 5 pages. He remembered what it felt like to be a person instead of just a baker. The renovation of the next-door space began in April. It was chaotic and expensive and frequently frustrating, but watching the vision come together, the cafe area with its comfortable seating, the teaching kitchen where he could run baking classes, the expanded prep space that would let him experiment with new recipes, filled Evan with something he hadn't felt in years. Not just satisfaction or accomplishment, but genuine excitement about the future. Claire was there through all of it, offering advice when asked, support always, and a perspective that helped him see possibilities he'd been too close to notice. Her consulting work had grown into a small but steady practice, and she was building relationships with nonprofits and community organizations that valued her expertise and ethics. One evening in late May, as they sat in the construction chaos of what would soon be the cafe area, Claire pulled out her phone and showed Evan a photo. "What do you think of this color for the walls? It's called warm wheat, and I thought it might be perfect." "It's great, but Claire, this is your project too. You don't have to ask my permission for every decision. I want to make sure it feels like yours. It feels like ours. You've been part of this from the beginning, even when I was too stubborn to admit I needed help. This whole thing exists because you believed in it before I did." "That's not true. You always believed in it. You just didn't believe anyone else would see the value." "Same difference." They kissed surrounded by sawdust and paint cans, and Evan thought about how much had changed in 6 months. How the scared, defensive man who'd shown up to a blind date he didn't want had become someone who could accept help, trust partnership, build something bigger than survival. The grand reopening happened on a Saturday in early June, warm sunshine pouring through the new windows of Brooks Bakery and Cafe. The place was packed. Regular customers amazed by the transformation, new faces drawn in by the buzz, friends and family filling the tables. Mrs. Chen cried when she saw the photo of Evan's father that hung prominently on the wall, a memorial to the man who'd started it all. Michael showed up with a date, a kindergarten teacher named Anna, who seemed both sweet and completely unimpressed by his job title, which Michael found refreshing. Linda came with a friend, admiring the space with grudging pride, even complimenting Claire on the color choices. As the afternoon wore on and the crowd showed no signs of thinning, Evan found himself standing behind the counter, watching Claire laugh with a customer while she expertly worked the espresso machine they'd installed. She'd learned the equipment in 2 weeks, insisted on helping with service during the opening, and fit into his world like she'd been there all along. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow in question. He just smiled and shook his head, overcome by the simple fact of her existence in his life, the way she'd appeared at exactly the right moment and stayed through all the uncertainty and growth and change. That night, after everyone had left and they'd cleaned up the worst of the mess, they sat at one of the cafe tables with wine and leftover pastries, exhausted but satisfied. "We did it," Claire said, raising her glass. "You did it. I would still be working 80-hour weeks in a failing bakery if you hadn't pushed me to think bigger. You would have figured it out eventually. I just helped speed up the timeline." Claire Morgan, will you accept credit for literally anything positive in your life? Will Evan Brooks accept that maybe his life isn't a failure and he doesn't have to prove his worth through constant self-sacrifice? Touché. He clinked his glass against hers. To uncomfortable growth. To choosing what's real over what looks good. To the best mistake I ever made. Claire's expression softened. Going to that blind date? Sitting in for Michael and meeting you, choosing to stay and talk instead of delivering the apology and leaving. Deciding that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to want something for myself. For what it's worth, I'm really glad you wanted me. Claire, I'm pretty sure I've been wanting you since the moment you told me I wasn't who you expected, but maybe that was exactly what you needed. Nobody had ever seen me that clearly that fast. Same. You looked so uncomfortable in that borrowed jacket, and all I could think was that here was someone who wasn't trying to impress me, who was just showing up honestly, even though it was awkward and weird and definitely not what he wanted to be doing. I'm still not good at this, at being vulnerable, at accepting help, at believing I deserve good things. Neither am I. At trusting people, at making decisions based on what I want instead of what I think I should want, at believing that choosing happiness over security isn't selfish. So we're both still figuring it out. Together, though, that's the part that matters. Evan reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. Move in with me. Claire's eyes widened. What? Move in with me. We're already spending every night together anyway, and you're in a month-to-month lease, and I know my place is small, but so is yours, and we could make it work. We could wake up together every morning instead of just the mornings you come to the bakery. We could build a life instead of just dating. Evan, that's a huge step. We've only been together 6 months. I know. And if you're not ready, that's okay. I just know that I love you, and I want you in my life permanently, and pretending we're taking things slow when we're already all in seems pointless. You love me. Yeah, is that okay? It's more than okay. I love you too. I have for weeks. I just didn't want to scare you off by saying it too soon. Nothing about you could scare me off. Well, maybe your tendency to reorganize my kitchen without asking, but I'm learning to live with it. Claire laughed, tears shining in her eyes. Yes. Yes to moving in? Yes to moving in. Yes to building a life. Yes to all of it. On one condition. Name it. We get a bigger place. Not fancy, just bigger. Somewhere we can both actually live instead of just existing in. Maybe even somewhere with a proper kitchen where I can experiment without tripping over Hermann the sourdough starter. We can do that. We can start looking tomorrow if you want. I want. But Evan, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me this isn't just convenience, that you're not asking me to move in because it makes practical sense or because you think it's what I want to hear. I need to know this is real for you, that you actually want to build a life with me and not just have company in your lonely apartment. Evan stood up and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her in the middle of the cafe they'd built together. Claire, I spent 8 years convincing myself that lonely was enough, that if I just worked hard enough and kept my head down and didn't want anything beyond survival, I'd be fine. And then you walked into my life and showed me what it feels like to actually live instead of just existing. To have someone who sees all my flaws and failures and chooses me anyway. To build something together instead of just maintaining what already exists. He pulled back enough to see her face, to make sure she understood he meant every word. This is the most real thing I've ever felt. Moving in together isn't convenience, it's choosing to stop pretending we're not already committed to this, to each other, to whatever future we're building. Claire kissed him with the kind of intensity that suggested words weren't enough, that only physical closeness could express what she was feeling. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she was smiling. Okay, let's do this. Let's find a place and build a home and see what happens when two people who are terrible at accepting good things decide they deserve to be happy. They found an apartment in early July, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of an old house 3 blocks from the bakery. It had hardwood floors that creaked, windows that let in morning light, and a kitchen big enough for both of them to cook without bumping into each other constantly. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Moving in together was chaotic and occasionally frustrating. Claire had strong opinions about furniture arrangement, and Evan had years of accumulated habits that didn't accommodate another person. They argued about closet space and bathroom schedules and whose turn it was to take out the garbage. But they also figured it out, learning to compromise and communicate and laugh at themselves when they were being ridiculous. The bakery continued to grow. Word spread about the cafe, about the quality of the food, about the baking classes Evan started teaching on Saturday afternoons. Tessa and Marcus became invaluable, eventually graduating from part-time to full-time as demand increased. Evan even hired a business manager, a retired accountant named Dorothy, who took over the parts of running a bakery that Evan hated, freeing him to focus on the actual baking. By September, Brooks Bakery and Cafe was profitable enough that Evan could actually pay himself a living wage instead of just scraping by. It wasn't wealth, but it was stability, security, the knowledge that he'd built something sustainable that honored his father's legacy while also being entirely his own. Claire's consulting practice had grown too, to the point where she was turning down clients because she was fully booked. She'd found her niche working with community organizations and small businesses, using her financial expertise to help people who actually needed it rather than those who just wanted to hoard more wealth. The work was meaningful and challenging and paid enough to live on comfortably. One evening in October, almost exactly a year after they'd met, they walked along the same waterfront where Evan had kissed Claire for the first time. The city was putting on its autumn show, the leaves turning gold and red, the air crisp with the promise of winter. "Do you ever think about that night?" Claire asked, her hand warm in his. "The blind date that wasn't really your blind date?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to not going, to telling my mom to handle her own problems, how different my life would be if I'd made that choice." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" "Not for a second." "You?" "I regret the time we wasted being scared. All those weeks where we were both so worried about moving too fast or wanting too much or believing this could actually work. We should have just trusted it from the beginning. We weren't ready to trust it. We had to grow into this, into each other. If we'd rushed it, we might have broken something that needed time to develop properly." Claire stopped walking, turning to face him under the bridge lights that made her eyes look luminous. "Evan Brooks, when did you become so wise about relationships?" "When I met someone worth figuring it out for." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the familiar comfort of her body against his. "I love you. I love our life. I love that we built something real together, instead of just settling for what was convenient. I love you too. And I love that we're still figuring it out, still learning, still choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard." "It's not that hard, though. Choosing you is the easiest thing I do." "Even when I reorganize your kitchen?" "Even then. Well, mostly then." They kissed there under the bridge, in almost the exact spot where they'd first kissed a year ago, and Evan felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This woman who'd appeared in his life by accident, who'd seen past his defenses to the person underneath, who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself, she was his future, his partner, his home. The months that followed brought their own challenges and victories. The bakery hit its first truly difficult period in January, a slow month where sales dipped and expenses stayed high. Evan panicked initially, falling back into old patterns of anxiety and overwork. But Claire was there to remind him that one bad month didn't negate a year of success, that sustainable businesses had ups and downs, that he didn't have to solve everything alone. They weathered it together, making small adjustments, tightening expenses without cutting quality, trusting that the foundation they'd built was strong enough to withstand temporary difficulties. By February, sales had rebounded, and Evan learned that having a partner meant sharing both the burdens and the celebrations. Spring brought new opportunities. A local food magazine wanted to feature the bakery, highlighting Evan's journey from struggling solo operation to thriving community hub. He did the interview reluctantly, uncomfortable with attention, but the resulting article brought a surge of new customers and inquiries about the baking classes. Claire's practice expanded too. She brought on an associate, another former corporate analyst who'd burned out and wanted to use her skills for good. Together they were able to take on bigger projects, help more organizations, make a real difference in their community. One Saturday morning in early May, Evan woke up next to Claire in the apartment they'd made into a home, sunlight streaming through the windows, and realized he was happy. Not the tentative, fragile happiness of new love, but the deep, settled contentment of knowing he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He got up quietly, trying not to wake Claire, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Herman, the sourdough starter, bubbled away on the counter, 3 decades old and still going strong, a living connection to his father and to everything that had come before. Claire appeared a few minutes later, sleepy and beautiful in one of his old t-shirts, and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Good morning," she murmured against his back. "Good morning. I was going to bring you coffee in bed." "I'd rather have coffee with you in our kitchen." She moved to stand beside him, accepting the mug he handed her. "What are you thinking about?" "How this time last year I was convinced I'd be alone forever, that I'd spend the rest of my life just getting by, maintaining what existed, never actually growing or changing or wanting anything more. And now? Now I wake up next to the woman I love in an apartment we chose together, and I have a business that's actually thriving instead of just surviving, and I'm not terrified of the future for the first time in years." Claire set down her coffee and took both his hands in hers. "Evan, I need to tell you something." His heart jumped. "That sounds ominous." "It's not, I promise. It's just important." She took a breath. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what I want my life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And every version I imagine has you in it, not just as my partner, but as my family, as the person I build a whole life with. I imagine the same thing." "Good. Because I want that to be official. I want to marry you, Evan. Not today, not even soon necessarily, but eventually. I want to stand in front of everyone we love and choose you permanently. I want to build something that lasts." Evan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Are you proposing to me right now?" "I'm telling you my intentions. The actual proposal can come later, in some romantic setting you plan, because you're better at that stuff than I am. But I needed you to know that when I say I'm all in, I mean it. This isn't temporary or conditional. This is forever, if you'll have me." Claire Morgan, I have been yours since the moment you looked across that cafe table and saw me instead of the version of myself I was trying to be. Forever sounds perfect. They stood there in their kitchen, coffee growing cold on the counter, holding each other while the morning sun painted everything gold. Outside, the city was waking up, people starting their days, living their lives, mostly oblivious to the small miracle happening in a modest apartment above an old bakery. But that was okay. The miracle wasn't for them. It was for Evan and Claire, 2 people who'd found each other by accident and stayed by choice, who'd learned that the best things in life often came from the mistakes you didn't plan for, the detours that took you somewhere better than your original destination. That evening, Evan walked to the bakery to do some prep work for Monday. The space had become so much more than his father's legacy or his obligation. It was his creation now, too, a place where community gathered, where his skills had value, where he could be proud of what he built. He stood in the doorway looking at the cafe area with its comfortable chairs and warm lighting, the display case full of goods he and his team had made, the chalkboard menu that changed with the seasons. This was success, he realized. Not in the way his mother had imagined or his brother had achieved, but in the way that actually mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Dinner at 7? I'm making that pasta you love." He smiled and typed back. "Perfect. I love you. Love you too. Now stop working and come home. The bakery will still be there tomorrow." She was right. The bakery would be there tomorrow and the day after that, and for years to come if he kept taking care of it. But tonight he had a home to go to, a woman who loved him waiting there, a life that felt full instead of empty. So Evan locked up the bakery, climbed the stairs to the apartment he shared with Claire, and walked into the warm glow of their kitchen where she was cooking and humming to herself and looking perfectly at ease in their shared space. "You're home early," she said, accepting his kiss hello. "I decided the prep work could wait. I'd rather be here with you." "Look at you prioritizing work-life balance. I'm so proud." "You're a terrible influence on my productivity." "I'm the best influence on your happiness, though." She was right about that, too. Claire was the best influence on everything: his happiness, his growth, his willingness to take risks and trust that things might actually work out. She'd appeared in his life like a gift he hadn't known he needed, and staying was the choice that changed everything. They ate dinner at their small table, talking about their days, making plans for the weekend, existing in the comfortable domesticity they'd built together. Later, curled up on the couch with a movie playing that neither of them was really watching, Evan thought about that rainy night almost a year ago when he'd sat across from Claire in a cafe, expecting nothing, receiving everything. His mother had been right about one thing: first impressions did matter, but she'd been wrong about what kind of impression was important. It wasn't polish or preparation or showing up as the impressive version of yourself. It was showing up honestly, vulnerabilities and all, and trusting that the right person would see you not despite those flaws, but because of them. Claire had seen him that first night, really seen him, and she'd chosen to stay. Everything that followed, the growth, the challenges, the building of a shared life, came from that initial choice to be honest instead of impressive. "Hey," Claire said, pulling him from his thoughts. "Where'd you go?" "Just thinking about how lucky I am. How different my life would be if Michael hadn't gotten sick, or if my mom hadn't called, or if you'd decided one awkward conversation was enough and left instead of staying. I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not that exact night, but somewhere, somehow. Some people are just meant to meet." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Because the alternative, that our entire future together hinged on a series of random accidents, is too terrifying to contemplate." Evan pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "Then I'm glad for every accident that led me to you. Every mistake, every detour, every choice that felt wrong at the time, but was actually exactly right. Me too, especially the part where you stepped into your brother's place and it turned out to be stepping into your own life. You remember that? From that first night?" "I remember everything from that first night. How nervous you looked, how honest you were, how you kept apologizing for things that weren't your fault, how I knew within 20 minutes that I wanted to see you again, even though it made no logical sense. And now here we are, living together, running businesses, planning a future. Building a life," Claire corrected. "Not planning, building. Every single day we choose this, choose each other, choose to keep showing up honestly even when it's hard." "I choose you," Evan said softly. "Today, tomorrow, every day after that. You're the best mistake I never knew I needed to make." Claire kissed him then, sweet and sure, and in that moment everything felt possible. The future wasn't scary anymore, wasn't a burden to be managed or survived. It was an adventure they were building together, one honest choice at a time. Outside, Portland settled into its Saturday night rhythm, lights twinkling across the river, life continuing in its messy, beautiful complexity. And in a modest apartment 3 blocks from a thriving bakery, 2 people who'd found each other by accident held on to each other by choice, proving that sometimes the wrong place at the right time was actually exactly where you were always meant to be. The best kinds of mistakes, Evan had learned, were the ones that looked like disasters but turned out to be doorways to everything you'd been too afraid to hope for. And stepping through that door, letting Claire into his carefully controlled life, choosing to be vulnerable instead of safe, that was the moment he finally stepped into his own life instead of just maintaining someone else's. He'd thought he was doing his brother a favor that rainy night. Turned out, he'd been doing himself the biggest favor of his life. And every morning he woke up next to Claire. Every day they built together was proof that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. It just had to be honest and chosen and tended with the same care he gave to his bread, patience, attention, and the faith that good things take time to rise.